You are now listening to the number one podcast.
You have been digitally interrupted.
Mr. I am digital.
Oh, I guess I have you on the speaker. Are we good on this? I don't need the AirPods.
You probably don't. No, I think you're fine. Is it recorded on your end?
Well, what does it say here?
It's supposed to say recording. Did it say like?
Yeah,
This is,
top
oh,
left.
okay. Okay. All right. I got you. All right. All right. So I'm just gonna give it a count off, and then we'll just start on up, and then we're good to go. So.
Is my eye line good if I look at you?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, like I had to pull my screen down, because behind my camera in order for me to go like eye line like that. So it's so weird because I feel like I'm not. But when I'm cutting back and forth. You'll be at full screen every time you talk. So
Cool.
yeah. All right. So here we go. All right, guys. So welcome to another episode of Digitally Interrupted. So on this episode today, we have I'm gonna call him a special guest because a lot of people may have heard of him. You guys may have seen him on ID Discovery. He had a documentary / show. And it's called Murder in Mansfield. So we have today Collier. I'm saying that right, Collier Landry. Yep. So if you can, for people that may not know you, can you just introduce yourself just a little bit to the audience and let them know who you are and what's going on with you?
Absolutely. So my name is Collier Landry. I'm a filmmaker based in Los Angeles. I am most known for creating a film called Murder in Mansfield, which is directed by two-time Oscar winner Barbara Kopple. It is about my life story, which when I was 12 years old or 11 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night on New Year's Eve and I heard two loud thuds. The next morning, my mother was missing, but I knew that she was no longer alive. My father said, "Oh, mommy went on a little vacation." She was a missing persons case. I kept saying, "My mother is dead." Only one detective believed me in my little small town. And together, he and I started piecing together the whole story. And 25 days later, they dug my mother's body up from underneath the house that my father bought for his mistress. I then was thrown into the foster care system. I testified at trial, at my father's month-long trial against my father, and effectively put him in prison because I was the only witness because I heard the murder happen. I made this film to, first of all, honor my mother, but to bring attention to the consequences of violence and ancillary victims that become the collateral damage of violence and how that impacts the world around us. It's something I've always been passionate about, and it was a real honor to be able to make the film. And I set out to make the film, change my life and impact somebody else. And like I said, honor my mother. And I've traveled all around the world. It's probably been in over 60 film festivals. I've done a TED Talk. I have, have my own episode of Dr. Phil. Numerous publications from USA Today to Esquire to the New York Times have covered this film, and it's impacted thousands of people. And it's a gift because as a filmmaker, this was the essential part of my journey in coming to Los Angeles, and to be able to see that fulfilled and then impact so many people is probably the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life. So there it is.
That's a mouthful. That's a lot. That's a lot there that I'm definitely going to like try to break down for the audience because I know they heard that and they're probably like, what they're trying to catch up to everything that you're saying. So I'm gonna just slow it down just for them, just for a little bit. Let's start with the early childhood. Like I had the opportunity of watching the film from a filmmaker standpoint. I wish and I hope that I will one day make a documentary on my life just with that clarity and the way you guys broke down the whole case. Like it was amazing. I loved it. I appreciate it from the filmmaker standpoint. And as a person who's also had their parent murdered, my dad actually was murdered when I was 3. So I related with just the concept in itself. I couldn't relate to the story itself, but just the content that was provided and the things that you went through as a child and just showing that it's deep. And I definitely commend what you did as far as standing up for your mom when she couldn't. Yeah. So, just like I said, the content, and I commend you for that and everything that you did with that story. It was crazy. And I want to talk about the early childhood though, because even though even though you've mentioned the bad part of your childhood, I want to talk about the great times though. Let's talk about the good times. The times that you can look back and smile on, because you did mention in the movie, I don't want to, I don't want to be the one to try to tell your story of what way I saw it because you lived it. And I also want people to go check it out. It's available on Hulu. Is it available on any other streaming platforms?
Amazon and Investigation Discovery. So if
Okay.
you have a cable subscription, you can call it up on like Investigation Discovery on their
Okay.
app or whatever, watch it on demand. And then, yeah, it's on Hulu and it's on Amazon, I believe.
Okay, so anybody that's watching this on YouTube or you're listening to this, I guarantee you what we're about to talk about, you're not going to get the same experience unless you watch the film itself. So, like, let's talk about the early days. Let's talk about the great times you did have with your mom when you did have them. What was your relationship like specifically with your mom? Like, what did you love about it so much?
Well, besides her being my mother, of course,
Right.
uh, one of the things that uh, really made the case so impactful to me, and the fact that I knew she was gone, is my mother never left me.
Gotcha.
So I was constantly by my mother's side.
Hmm.
I was like her world, right? For good or bad, you know. Um, so when I woke up in that morning, I knew that she was gone.
Hmm.
Um, my mother, so my family is all from the East Coast. They're all from Philadelphia. Just to sort of backtrack, I'm the only member of my family not to go to Penn. Like my
Hmm.
mother went to Penn, my father graduated from Wharton, aunts, uncles, everybody went to Penn. Uh, so my parents had placed a really high value on education.
Right.
And growing up, I was, it was funny because, my mom would really dive into everything that I was interested in. So I was always constantly learning, and I learned that from a young age to always be hungry for knowledge, being a voracious reader, getting involved in the arts and all these things, right? So my mother was very like, literally, like, school would end, I'd get like a week off, then I'd go into summer school, go into
Right.
classes for science and arts and all this stuff, that like some kids, their dads are out there pushing them to throw a baseball and be a baseball star. And my parents were so into education, and that was the thing. So for me growing up, I had that support basis from my mother. I was her constant companion, and she was wonderful. She was the light in my life, and I hers. And she was strict with me in a lot of ways, but at the same time, she was like my best friend, and I loved her obviously a lot, with all my heart. And I the memories of just her. I mean, in the film, I talk about certain things that, I was like a little adult with her. So she talked to me. One of the interesting things is when you make a film like this and you delve into the psyche of the characters, which myself being a character, uh, a lot of people, therapists, behavioralists will tell you, when a parent treats a child like an adult and talks to them like a person, that really is what enhances their growth. It's not the baby talk or the babying. It's like, and my mother treated me like I was an adult. I
Right.
knew about things that not a lot of normal kids learn about. And in fact, I was, I mean, I had a Game Boy when they first came out, and this was like kind of when all this happened, but I was the last person out of any of my friends to get a Nintendo. I was allowed to go play Nintendo at a friend's
Right.
house
Right.
on special occasions. The Game Boy was cool when it came out because it was portable, so I could sit. It would shut me up in the car or whatever.
Right.
But but my mom was not on that tip. My mom was on the, you're playing Math Blaster on the computer. Like, yeah, maybe I just
Right.
completely dated myself, but I'm sure
Right.
but some people might remember Math Blaster.
Yeah, I
But
definitely do. I definitely do. Yep.
so those were the things, and so my mother was, like I said, very into my education, my artistic side, and really developing that. And again, treating me like I was like a little person. I mean, she used to joke and say, yeah, he's like 10 going on 40.
Right.
Because I was just like a little person. And then, you know, when you watch the film, and for me, and we will delve in this in a little bit, but when I didn't see the film until I saw it in the theater.
Okay.
So because I wanted to be removed from the editorial process, and Barbara wanted me to be removed from that too. She just never wanted to say that, but
Right.
that's how I felt, because I figured, look, my contributions are going to be purely vanity. I sound stupid here, I look fat in this shot, or whatever. It's not going to contribute to the actual, you know, benefit of the picture. And let's just face it, she went to Academy Awards. She kind of knows what she's doing.
Right.
A little bit. So, so I was like, okay, I'm in good hands, right?
Right.
At the same time, I you know, so I'm watching the film in the theater, and I'm looking at myself as a young man on the witness stand, and I'm like, oh my God, I haven't changed at all. This is the same. I'm like I just look older. I got a beard. You know,
Right.
I'm essentially the same cat. I'm the same kid up there, and that is everyone's response when they see the film. They're just like, you are, you know, that's who you are.
Right.
And it's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy.
You know,
I don't know if that answered your question or not. That was me just
yeah,
throwing.
no, that was perfectly fine, but I appreciate that too, because you know, you definitely explained how you actually saw yourself, and that's actually the key, because a lot of people would think like, well, what did you think about the film? You know what I mean? And obviously it came out, so you had to approve it at some point, you know, but you know, I think it's crazy that the first time you saw it was in the theater, because people don't, and let me explain this to everybody that's listening or watching this. All right, so from a filmmaker standpoint, when you take somebody out of editorial process, this kind of defeats the insecurities of the person being on camera. So it kind of speeds up the editorial process, because if we include the persons that we're covering and we let them control what we're trying to bring to the, you know, to the forefront, we'll be editing probably forever. We'll be reshooting, and when you do reshoots, everybody know time is money. So when you see something for the first time, when it's finally done, it's kind of like you got to take what I just gave you, and if you give me any editorial points, I'm just letting you know that we're probably not going to do it, because we're done now. Because people don't like to re-edit. We hate re-editing. We hate reshooting. It's the most annoying process unless we ourselves call it. If we don't call it, we don't want to do it. So that's bananas that you were even that patient, because I know for a person like me, I'm like, I don't even want to see it no more. Nope. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it in the theaters. I don't care what it looks like. Just I'll see it when I get there. So you're brave. I wouldn't have watched it. I don't even want to see it. Nope. I don't even want to see it. Nope. Just release it wherever it's going to be released. I'll talk about it later. But
You know, to be honest with you, the first time I saw it, I hated it.
really?
I hated it.
Wow.
I didn't, but it wasn't because I hated the film.
I get it.
I was going through such a wave of emotions, again, sitting in a theater, thinking, okay, I said something in there. I was like, I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I said this.
Yep.
You know, and I like to think of myself as a pretty articulate guy.
Right.
But sometimes when you're on camera, you'll just say some stuff like, you know, I think I
The
was
rambling moments.
I did. They talk about something, and I said, you know, I meant to say desecrated. I think I said defecated.
And let me guess. They kept that in there.
No, they didn't. But
Okay.
I was talking to Barbara. I said, were there any moments? She's like, yeah, you had 2 of them, but everything else was perfect. And that was one of the things. I was like, oh man, you stupid.
That's funny. That's funny. But you know, just going, like I said, just the way that she put that film together, like I felt like I was just in a flow of a timeline. And that was the most amazing part, because I just, like I said, when I watch films now, because I'm a filmmaker, I just look at everything and I just kind of pick it apart. And in this film, I was like, I didn't really find any things that I would have been like, all right, I would have said this differently, or I would have put this over here, or put this in this timeline. It was like a time traveling thing. Like we just start at the beginning, and then this is where we end up at. When everything had happened, you know, and like I said, I just want everybody to go check the film out. I don't want to tell too much of the film in here because then people are like, oh, I heard everything. I don't want to go. Please go watch the film, man. So when everything had happened, you know, what what was that process of emotions going through? Like, how long did it take you to kind of like, you know, process these emotions? Because for one, there was no weaning. It was just you woke up one day, she was here, one day she wasn't. You know, that process though, the trial is a whole nother process. So I'm talking about before the trial even goes on. What was that process of? Because a lot of people don't understand the law, they don't understand how it works. You know, I want you to kind of like give them insight on if a child at any point or an adult, you know, if somebody is, you know, you thinking like, is are you reporting this person missing first before, you know, what happened? Like, what was that process? Like one day you said, you know, no, I know this is different. What happened after that?
So, and again, like I was saying before, when you make something of this, when you make a film like this and you go through all these sort of stages, and then the film is released and you start talking to people that are, you know, psychologists and work with kids and whatever, and they start to explain to you, like, I had a friend and she works with foster care kids, right? And she was like, she saw the film and she said, hey, you know, we went to high school together.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I want to talk to you about it because I have some answers for you. And basically, you know, she said, the way that your mother treated you was what made you, how your response, because your cognitive development in a lot of ways was up here
Mm-hmm.
as a kid instead of like down as a child, like a child development. So your fight or flight, and so she says when trauma hits people, right? So if you're at this level, you bounce and you land at this level where you're like, okay, and you're using instead of you know your limbic system, right? And your emotions, you're using like your, and I'm not a doctor, but like your frontal cortex, your thoughts, like, okay, you're rational, this is what's happening.
Right.
So when I, in like, for example, in my TED talk, I talk about you go from in your response to trauma from why to what now or what's
Right.
next, right?
Right.
So for me, my what now started the morning that I woke up after hearing the thuds, and it was an action plan.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that she was dead in my heart of hearts, and I hoped it. I hope not, but I could tell.
Right.
And you know, as I, you know, after I heard the thuds, and I heard these footsteps slowly creep down the hallway, and I was sleeping in bed, and I was looking at the clock. It was like a Batman clock that was on the wall, and it said like 3:18 a.m. Right,
Mm-hmm.
which ironically, almost every New Year's Eve, I wake up at that time in the morning, like
Right.
clockwork. It's, I don't know if it's a psychological thing or what, but
Right.
and I you know, I could see out of my peripheral vision my father's footsteps in my doorway. And I'm saying to
Mm-hmm.
myself, don't look up. Don't look up, because I know that if I had gone like this and looked up, I wouldn't be sitting here.
Right.
100%. And um and that's a scary thought, by the way, as I'm
It is.
thinking.
No, it is when you think about it. Yep.
Uh so for me, it was like, okay. And again, in my TED talk, I talk about, you know, we as human beings are natural empaths, right? And we are always wanting to figure out why things happen to us, or why a horrible tragedy happens and towers are falling down in you know lower Manhattan, or you know some crazy man is driving their you know car into a crowd of protesters, or whatever, you know, the tragically you know consequential violence that is occurring right around the world, right? So you know my response was, okay, instead of trying to figure out why my mom's gone, what do I do now? What's the action plan? So I
Right.
call her friends, I say she's missing. Police are dispatched to the house, you know, on New Year's Day. And my father is away because he's traveling to Erie, Pennsylvania, because he's handling this. He's burying her body. He's doing all this stuff. And I literally tell, and my father was a doctor in small town Ohio.
Right.
So they're not exactly interested in opening up cases against people that have the means to sue the police department
Mm-hmm.
or be like, why are you doing this? So their approach was very much like, you know, well, leave this guy alone. Like, she's missing. They got into a fight. His story was they got into a fight. She left in a car down the driveway. That's it, right? So she's a missing person.
Right.
I knew that wasn't true. By the grace of God, a police detective named Lieutenant David Messmore on this, I believe it was the 2nd of January, or the missing persons report had crossed his desk. And he looked at it and he goes, huh, this is interesting. And so he came out to the house on his own accord because he felt that it was something was weird.
Mm-hmm.
And I basically pulled him aside and I said, my mother would never do this. I know that something has happened to her and I don't trust my father as far as I could throw him. That's literally what I said. And from that point to when they finally, exhumed her body from underneath the basement floor of his house 25 days later, it was me going into, I had a relationship with him where I would be at school. My father is often Erie. My grandmother, my father's mother, who was really close to my mother, like almost like her mother in a lot of ways.
Right.
She was, saying, we're not going to talk to the police. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. And basically keeping a watchful eye over me. I wasn't allowed to be on the telephone.
Mm-hmm.
When I was home, I'd have to sneak off with the portable phone. And then finally that was taken away from me and stuff because I was calling her friends and everything and trying to call the police because my father was like, we're not going to call the police. We're not going to call the FBI. Mommy left. And I'm going, no, that's not what happened.
Right.
Like,
Right.
So to me, so I would say, hey, I'm going to go home and I'm going to pull out the bookshelves that like lead to the crawl space in the house and look for my mother's body. I mean, these are the things I was thinking of as a 12-year or as an 11-year-old boy, not normal stuff.
Right.
And I was cataloging like my father's behavior. Like he was a very violent and aggressive man. I mean, I'm sure you gathered that from the film.
Yep.
But he all of a sudden, when everything happened, he turned into like, he would be showing me like movies like Rambo and Predator and all this stuff. Then all of a sudden he turned into this whole like against violence and why are you playing a video game that has shooting and all this? I'm like, who are you? Like, this is weird. Like,
Right.
first of all, I wasn't terribly close to my father. I spent 99% of the time with my mother. The only times I would really spend with my father is I would sometimes go on rounds with him to the hospital to meet patients and that was cool. And I would like play a little harmonica and tap dance and whatever and entertain people because that was my thing.
Right.
And then I, or we would go skiing together and that was it. Like that was the real crux of our relationship,
Right.
So he turned very odd. And so about 10 to 12 days into January, I'm with my father, he's in his truck and we pull into a service station. He's going inside to get lottery tickets or whatever, doing gas things. And as soon as I know he can't see me, I open up a little, armrest thing or like I'm searching in the glove box and I find a picture of a house, a Polaroid, and another photograph of his girlfriend. And she was sitting with her 2 kids in front of a fireplace that was wrapped in plastic. That was like covered with plastic. So it looked like a new fireplace.
Right.
And, this is 1990. So we don't have Google. We can't like resources. It's like, old fashioned detective work at that time because so I tell Lieutenant David Messmore about this picture of this house and Sherry being in the house. And I said, I think my father has another house. Turns out he does. And then that's when the whole thing started of, get across state lines, getting into search warrants. That's sort of when their investigation yielded some, okay, maybe we should look into this house. But of course, you're dealing with 2 different police departments and everything. And
Right.
So I was able to tip them off in that way. And that's ultimately where they found my mother's body, like probably about like 10, 12 days after that.
That's cool.
Now about around the 20th, so that she was found, I was removed from the house on the 24th of January. 25th of January is like when I was notified that she was found. Around the 20th, 21st, because my father, I was starting to get a sense like he was getting wind of what I was up to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, police investigator kept coming back, wanting to talk to my dad, this, that, and the other. I think that he thought of like, you know, that he, you know, that something was going down, right? So he has this idea. He goes, oh, you know, I have a medical conference in Florida, which was not uncommon because we used to go twice a year to Clearwater Beach, Florida, where these medical conferences were. I had never been there with my father alone at this time.
Right.
And he said, oh, I'm going to take you to, you know, to Florida. We'll go to a medical conference. And now I grew up, the first things my parents did is teach me how to swim. I was a good swimmer. I still am. And they, you know, I was terrified because I was like, I don't think I'm coming back from Florida. I got that sense.
Okay.
And I told David Massmore, I said, look, he wants to take me to Florida. And I don't feel good about that. I'm scared. And because it just came out of nowhere, because first of all, the medical conferences really weren't around that time.
Right,
They were
right.
like towards the spring. This is the dead of winter. And I knew that. So something was rotten in Denmark. And no offense to the Danes that might be watching, but something wasn't quite right. And that put him into high alert. And he was like, we got to have children's services get this guy out of here.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually the only witness to what could be a murder.
Right.
Which ultimately ended up being the case. So they removed me from the home on the 24th of January. Children's services came in, and they're like, you know, and all these, you know, police detectives, they're in there, the crime lab, they've got these scanners for bodies and all this commotion's happening. And I'm woken up, they're like, you got 20 minutes to pack a bag and we're getting out of here type thing. And, you know, my dog was there, who I loved. And they're like, well, you can get your dog later. That ended up not being the case. I never saw my dog again, which was a big deal to me. And I, you know, you had a light fall a little bit ago when we were talking about some stuff, and you're like, oh, something happened. So I have an interesting story about the dog, so you can ask me later during, you know, because that was a big deal, and I ended up finding closure with that too, which was amazing, but completely out of the blue.
Right.
So yeah, so I don't know if I've answered your question or not, but it was basically nobody listened to me except for one detective, and and then that's how everything started unraveling. Because, and even at the time, the police captain said, you know, if you don't find, he's like, we are going after a doctor. We don't do this. If you don't find anything, you're done. Like, you're fired. Like, he's like, this is an embarrassment. You know, you're going to be an embarrassment, this, that, and the other. And it ended up being one of the largest cases in Ohio history.
That's crazy. I was going to say, because I know a lot of like small towns usually are like that. It's one of those, like, if there's nothing, move on, because all the time, the resources, the money that they have to spend into, you know, investigating and sending out, paying overtime and all this. You know, for one, I never lived in a small town. I'm a city guy. So when I watch these movies, I'm like, wow, it's like the same complex. Small towns, if they have like one police department that controls the whole town, it's like, you know, they probably got maybe 10 police officers, 2 detectives, 1 sheriff. You know, where the big cities are like, you know, you get about 2 sheriffs, you know, a couple sheriffs, you know, here and there, and it's bananas. So, you know, for all of those people that live in big cities, big towns, like small towns have it bad. So when big crimes there's a lot of crimes in small towns we'll never hear about because there's just nothing to report, you know, in a sense. But you know, that's such a crazy part of the story because you're so young, but you're also so in tuned with the way life operates and the things that go on. You didn't miss nothing. Like that's the crazy thing about it. You didn't miss a beat. And it's deep because like I said, when I saw it, I was like, God, I'm trying to put myself at 12 years old, and I'm like, where was I at 12 years old? Like, where was I mentally at? But my grandmother who raised me, she taught me a lot as well. Like I knew how to cash a check at 12. I knew how to write a check at 12. You know, I was raised that way, you know, but I was also raised by a grandparent where she's already raised her first set of kids, and to get another set is like, I'm gonna teach you everything I didn't teach them. I'm not gonna make the same mistake again. You know, so that and that's pretty dope that your mom was actually the first generation parent to actually teach you something besides, you know, grandparents. If they, you know, if they had that opportunity, she was able to give you that. And that's dope. I love that. Now there's another piece of that story that, you know, I definitely want to talk about. I mean, I want to kind of leave it, you know, I'm gonna leave that for people to go watch in the film, because I don't even want to talk about that part, because that part threw me for a loop because I didn't see it coming. So I'm gonna just give you guys a heads up. There's another person involved in this story that you guys have to go watch the film and you know what I'm talking about. But the dog. So your connection to the dog, a lot of people are gonna feel this because a lot of people think, you know, a lot of us that don't have pets, you know, only thing I think I ever cried over was my gerbil. And that was when I had a gerbil when I was younger, and he died when I was in school. I came home, I was like, I couldn't understand like what happened. So for somebody to have a pet that's alive, can't go back and get him, you know, what is that in this young child's mind? Like, where are you at with that mentally? Like, what was that how did you disconnect from that at all?
I mean, I even when I was finally adopted at 13, I even, you know, I wanted to get the dog back, and my adopted parents were like, you know, and they had a dog when I
Right.
arrived,
Right.
and they're like, no, he wouldn't get along with Rusty. There was like any excuse, but basically the dog was gone. So flash forward to 2018, and I'm doing the hometown screening of the film, and it's the second day, and it is probably like 105 degrees outside in Ohio. It's a massive heat wave. It's nasty,
Yeah.
nasty. I love the heat, but you know, when you're in the theater. So in the middle of the film, at a very key part, when I'm looking at some photographs, the film shuts off in the middle of the auditorium. And I jumped right up because I knew exactly what happened. That the projector went out, and I turn and I look in the projector booth, and I make eye contact with the guy he's the houseman. He's an audio guy, he's a lighting guy, he's not a projector guy, and he took on the responsibility of screen. They'd never really screened a film there before. You know, they show films, but not listening like that.
Right.
You know, a premiere and whatever, you know, in a film that was so many people were connected to, right? And the projectors, and I jump up and I see him and I run up and I'm like, it overheated. All I'm hoping is like the bulb didn't burst on the projector, because I'm thinking to myself, okay, here's a, you know, a DLP, and where are we going to get a bulb on a Sunday in Mansfield, Ohio for a project? Like, you know, I'm like, this would be terrible. Anyways, luckily it just overheated. But so there was a forced intermission in the middle of the film, and it was, I was, and the part of the movie where this happens, I was like, this is my mom interrupting, and I knew it when it happened, and I then discovered why. So because there was this forced intermission, this woman comes down, and I had seen her looking at me before, but she wasn't going to talk to me. Right. You know, she told me this. It just happened that we were there. I was standing in the aisle. I was talking to some people, and she came up and she goes, "Hi, Collier. My name is," and I can't remember her name right off the top of my head, but, you know, I think we had your dog.
Wow.
And mind you, I have always wondered about this. And even making the film, never found out. And I have, you know, I now have a one Chihuahua who's still alive. Her name was Blondie. She's sitting right here. She'll be 16 in March. Yeah. She had a brother that I had first with a girlfriend, and I was very attached to him. He had a lot of health problems, and so after I made the film, but I eventually had to put him to sleep in 2017, and I was so connected to this dog in a way, and her as well, because I think that I had never found out what happened to Gowdy, and so this was like my first. I was connected in this weird thing, and I hate to just take it off on a tangent about dogs, but this something about human connection that you discover as a filmmaker, and so I think it's important. Um, anyway, she says, I think that I had your dog, and then she says we got it from this person who I think was your house cleaner, and then she gave it to us, and she's like, I just want you to know that he had the best life.
Mhm.
And I was like, and I'm like at this point like about ready to just completely lose my
Right,
shit.
right, right, right,
I'm
right, right, right.
welling up with tears. And then she starts telling me, she's like, I was raised on a farm. He had all the space in the world to run. We had horses, we had pigs, and was best friends with the pigs.
Mhm.
And um he would go to sleep with the pigs in their little pig pen at night
Right, right.
because they were friends and all this. She's like, he was so loved. He lived a long and healthy life and he was happy. And I was like,
I could
well,
imagine, yeah.
it's things like that. And I'm tearing up just thinking about it. It's things like that. When you make a film, first of all, the film impacts people, second of all, and you do it for the right reasons. Let's just face it, you don't make documentary films to make money. That's
Right,
just
right. Yeah, right.
not how that goes. Uh, you, um, but the rewards that come out of something like this, being it so personal, is getting closure on so many levels. It's hard to explain, and that's why when people are fortunate, like you talk about yourself, you eventually want to do something about your story, right? Which
Mhm.
we'll talk about in a sec.
Yep.
You know, uh, the rewards that you get from doing a project and I think one of the best things about my outlook on the project and what I chose to do was be as vulnerable as possible.
Right. Right.
And it's that vulnerability that has connected me with the audiences, that resonates with the audiences, that it's the authenticity, it's the vulnerability. It's, obviously not being able to be scared. There are parts in the film when I go to see the case file, and Barbara Kopple is a filmmaker. She's done documentaries on everybody from the Dixie Chicks to Woody Allen to
Mhm.
you know everybody.
Mhm.
The Hemingway suicides, Running from Crazy. I'm doing a project with her right now about the Pointer Sisters.
Mhm.
So there's lots of, she's dealt with a lot of very famous people, Bon Jovi, all this. And, because you're from Jersey, I got to throw the Bon Jovi thing out. Um, so, uh, you know, having somebody like that, she is so good at drawing things out of you. So there's the moment where they say, you want to see the case file, and she's like, Collier, would you mind doing this? And David Messmore is in the film and his wife are like, absolutely not, like, you're not seeing this. And I'm like,
Mhm.
no. I'm like, this is what we're here to do.
Right.
It's everything. You got to lay out your soul on camera, because
Right.
that's the only way you are going to be able to create something that is going to impact people and going to touch their soul and going to resonate with them. If you
Exactly.
can be authentic and vulnerable.
Right.
And that's a huge moment in the film. And it has resonated with people everywhere because they're just like, I can't believe doing that. I can't imagine it. And your vulnerability inspires me. And that makes it all worth it in the end. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yep.
So that's a cool thing.
Yep. And from like I said, once again, it's funny because, like I said, we both have, our stories, but also how we've become filmmakers to tell other stories. It's so crazy because a lot of people might look at us sometimes. Like, I know for me, if I see a story that I feel like needs to be seen or needs to be heard, I'm not afraid to jump at him like, hey, you need to tell your story. Where somebody might be kind of taken back, like, I don't want to go there. But I'm like, listen, don't ever be afraid to tell your story. Like, that's just my belief. Like, somebody is gonna take from it. I don't care if you go on Facebook Live or Instagram Live and it's only one person in your live. Tell that story. Somebody's gonna hear it. You can save it, download it, put it and post it up. There's ways you can reach the masses with your story. So I just wanted to definitely, commend you on that for the bravery that you took, because even like you said, you saw the case files. I probably, I probably couldn't have did it. You know what I mean? Like I personally probably would have been like, I don't know, but it made it bad enough because just as bad of you seeing those, I was actually able to read the death certificate, and the death certificate is sometimes just as it gives just as much detail than actually seeing it on photo. So when I was 12, I actually found the death certificate. That was the first time I actually found, to even see what happened. And I was like, what? Gunshot? Like, what you mean? And coming back from finding about his story, I was able to find out what he was doing and the reasons why all of this went down the way it did. And I mean, it took me, now I'm 33. I think I didn't want to tell my story. I told my story for the first time when I was 12, but that was because I didn't have a relationship with my mom and I was looking for my mom, but I think when I turned 25, I was actually ready to, like, all right, I've met my mom finally and able to tell my story. And people don't really know how much that takes to actually sit and open up to people that don't know you, like there's just people like looking at you in the audience like, yeah, so, and if they don't connect with you, they don't understand, it goes from I'm empathizing with you to now I'm just being nosy and I just want to know. And that's the one that hurts, when people can't empathize with you, because that's what we all look for, that empathy when it's coming time to tell our stories.
Oh,
And and that's where I feel like you made that mark in this story, and like, and accommodations, to her as well for putting this story so well put together to even tell it, and the way it was put together. I know you guys are probably like, man, can you please tell us more about this? No, I'm not telling y'all nothing. I'm trying to tell y'all to go watch it yourself, because there's a lot of things that we're not going to talk about in this podcast interview that you guys might want to go watch yourself. So when did you know, after all of this, when did you know, at what point in time in your life did you know you wanted to do film? Like when did you know about that?
so I always wanted to do something with the story, right?
Okay.
And photography was like my hobby in high school.
Okay.
I got into photography probably when I was a sophomore ish. The arts were, as I talk about in my TED talk, like the arts were my escape, right? And how I coped with what I was going through. Not only with what happened as a kid, but then the aftermath of that, going into the system, getting adopted, dealing with a new family, dealing with living in the same town where all this went down, where I'm a, you know, pseudo celebrity for all the wrong reasons.
Right.
So I was like, well, how am I gonna? I've always wanted to kind of get out of that shadow of that. Like, oh, that's the Boyle kid. That's the kid whose dad killed his mom, and he testified at trial. Blah blah blah. Right. Um. So in 1999, I was out here visiting a friend, and I was in Los Angeles, and I went to the Dollar Theater. I saw a film called American History X, which
Mm-hmm.
stars Edward Norton, Beverly D'Angelo, Elliot Gould, Edward
Yep.
Furlong.
Amazing
An
film.
amazing film,
Amazing
in
film.
my
Yep.
mind, top 5 films of all time. And if no one's seen it, you got to watch it.
Definitely
Uh,
agree. Yep. Yep.
yeah, it's still to this day very apropos to what's going on.
Right. Right. Yep. Yep.
Crazy. Um, and I said, whoever made that film understands the consequences of violence,
Mm-hmm.
and I want them to help me tell my story. So flash forward 10 years later, my girlfriend at the time, we lived with this house in Hollywood, and I had moved out here I went to school for music. So I moved out here to
Okay.
do music and all that stuff. Then I got into modeling and doing stuff in front of the camera. And then I went into music, and then that didn't work out in sort of a debacle. And I was sort of in this time period of like, okay, I've got to figure out what my next move is. And I'm like, okay, I was interested in photography. I met some people through Craigslist that worked on set, and they said, here, you can learn. And they would bring me on sets, and they were like, look, you can come out, but you're working for free. You'll get a free meal out of it, but it's like getting an education,
Right. Exactly.
and you're getting it firsthand, right? So I learned like that. That's how I got into filmmaking. Anyways, I met, and this was before I was really on that tip, sort of like in that life, like limbo. Okay, this didn't
Mhm.
work out. I thought I was going down this pathway. Now I'm going down a different pathway. Anyways, I met who ended up becoming my co-executive producer of the film and mentor to me, John Morrissey. So my fiance or my girlfriend at the time, she comes in, she says, this guy wants to doing a coffee table book. He's a movie producer. I was like, well, what films did he produce? Oh, Booty Call, something called Havoc, something called 1114, and American History, something. I was like, American History X. She goes, yeah, that's it. She met him through MySpace. I'm like, get him over here.
Right.
We become friends. And uh when I was 18, some idea to do a docu-series about the consequences of violence in America. And the best thing is I own the rights to the pilot, and it's about my life. And I
Hmm.
gave him this book, and sort of the rest is history. He knew Barbara Kopple. We got her on board. This is like 2009. And for everyone that's watching that is a
Collier,
filmmaker
Collier,
or
I'm gonna have you start over with
you
that
study it,
part. No, right with there with the book, because for some reason I heard this like robotic thing happen, and you were talking, but there was no audio.
interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
I was
I
like,
was gonna
what happened?
say now your video is back. Your video got super choppy. And
Okay, so it might have been me. Okay.
yeah, so I don't know. But anyways, let's redo it. So
Yeah, so yeah, from where your girlfriend got with the MySpace, right after my, yep,
my girlfriend got this message on MySpace, and she comes
yep.
into my little office in our house that we have, and we're in Hollywood, and she's like, yeah, this guy she was a model. She's like, he wants to shoot a coffee table book with models and this, that, and the other. He's a movie producer. I was like, oh, well, what movies has he done? She's like, well, Booty Call. And I'm like, oh, I remember Booty Call and 1114 and some movie called Havoc and Kingdom Come and some movie called American History. I was like, American History X. And she's like, yeah. And I was like, get him here.
Mm-hmm.
And I met him. We became friends. I said, look, I'm interested in getting in the film business. He's like, well, I'm a producer. So he started kind of introducing me a little bit to this world, from the producing side. And I was interested. So I started learning all facets, got jobs on Craigslist, like I was saying, and, to work on set, things like that. And I eventually said to him, I said, look, he wanted to do a film project. And I was like, I don't want to do something like that. It's kind of silly. And I was like, I don't want to do that with you. What I want to do is something that's going to enhance your legacy and mine. I want to do a docu-series about the consequences of violence. And the best news is pilot for the series, I own the rights to because it's
Right.
based on my life. I
Nice.
gave him this book, this blue book of newspaper articles, and he read through them and was like, holy, like, he was stunned. He goes, well, I know somebody who might be interested in this. And that was Barbara Kopple because he had done her film Havoc. He had produced it.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a documentary filmmaker, but this is her first feature, like narrative feature. And it stars like, Anne Hathaway. I mean, it's a great cast. Anne Hathaway, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Freddie Rodriguez, and Channing Tatum before he was Channing Tatum that we all know and love.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's a great film. And but her thing is documentaries, and she became interested in it. And so, like I was saying, that was 2009. We didn't make the film until almost 2017. So for anyone that's a filmmaker, this is a long and arduous process. And it's not like I was telling somebody this the other day. Some people behave like they're handing out sitcoms at the airport. Like, oh, I'll come to LA, I'll be famous.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, whatever. I've got a really interesting story, or everybody's got this screenplay, and oh, I'm going to make the screenplay, and a lot of it is follow through. And
Right.
as I'm progressing in my, that relationship with the girlfriend ended, and I moved on, and I got into heavily just okay, I'm not supporting anyone. I'm going to work on this filmmaking thing. I'm going to learn everything I can about filmmaking from being a grip to being a gaffer to a juicer and then I was like, oh, I wonder if I could shoot things and make money because I love photography. Oh, there's a director of photography. So I started getting into like learning all this stuff, get a video camera, get this. I think my first real camera was a Sony FX 1000,
Okay.
which was like the Z1U camera, but it didn't have the XLR inputs.
Right.
And I used that to shoot stuff and just, I taught myself Final Cut, everything like that. So I was like, I wanted to do something with the story. And so as it really didn't, the momentum didn't start picking up until like 2015. Got an agent over at Gersh representing the project. We got interest with Barbara attached from, ID Discovery, from Amazon, and everybody wanted. And then ID Discovery was like, look, because they're true crime and they're really like starting to kill it in the true crime market. And they're like, we want to do something with Barbara. We love this story because there was already an IP built around it. There was an episode of Forensic Files. People were aware of the case, blah, 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 right? So they were like, we love to do this. And we want to do it as like a 1 hour, one-off pilot. And the concept was there was going to be 8 to 10 episodes a season. And each episode was going to be about a traumatic, violent event. And each episode was going to be directed by a different documentary filmmaker. Right. So Morgan Spurlock would do one. D.A. Pennebaker would do one. And you can think of all the documentary filmmakers that would
it goes crazy.
Be great for this, right? Michael Moore. So that was the concept. And
sorry, damn light. Yeah, I'm like, what is wrong with this light? But all right, there we go. Go ahead. You can keep going. Go ahead.
But it ended up being the full-fledged documentary because we shot everything, and the first edit, I believe, was like 3.5 hours.
Jesus Christ.
And like then to cut it down to what you now see. And Barbara was just like, she went to Investigation Discovery. She goes, this isn't a 1 hour thing. This is this story. I can't tell the story in under, 2 hours or whatever. This has to be
without missing context.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what you end up seeing. And that's one of the wonderful things about filmmaking, and I believe art in general, is you set off with one idea, you're like, okay, this is what and the natural evolution of things, the way that it all plays out becomes totally different.
Yep.
Which is sometimes can throw you for a loop, but also is really one of the super cool things about all of this. So that's how the sort of generation, the genesis of the project happened.
And that's so dope. That's so dope because and what you really keyed in on was people think that as writers, filmmakers, producers, executive producers, people just think like one day we wake up and we write up a little script. Let's go shoot this tomorrow. We'll be done in a week. It comes out tomorrow. Like, it's not like that, and I know for me, I'm a very impatient person. I'm the type of person where once I start something, no, it has to get done now. It got to come out tomorrow. But there's also a beauty in the dysfunction of how long things take, because people don't realize that timing is the essence in the universe. So when it's supposed to come out is when it's going to come out. And people don't realize that in the film industry, because we're so much of a creative, that the universe sometimes will make us sit down, be patient, and start to put people around us as it goes along to actually build up and tell the story that you want to bring, but also it'll bring it in a different light. It also bring a different power to it. So for you didn't have a lot of these, people in your path yet when you wanted to tell a story at first. It took about 9 years for it to actually come out. The process that it went through, the format that you guys created at first, it didn't go that way. But it also worked in your advantage. Like, it still worked. The universe brought it back to where it is now. Now, my question is, are we ever going to see the footage that was not put into the film itself?
That's a good question. I don't know. That's a really good question. I have a whole hard drive full of like video diaries. Like when I went into pre-production on this, I went back to Ohio. Here's the thing. This is a little inside baseball information. So filming in a prison, and a little bit of a spoiler alert, but we do go to the prison in the film. Filming in a prison is not as easy as one would think. So what happened is I'd had permission from the prison in Ohio at that time. The warden, whatever the warden says goes. So I had hooked up some friends of mine that were motorcycle stunt riders that became like crusaders for, they found God and were saved. And so that was their mission. And I was like, look, these guys could go and do stunt shows at the prison. So I had hooked them up with the warden, and they would go and they did these shows and stuff, and super cool. And I had gotten the warden tentative permission to like come in there and film, right? Finally, there were so many things I was doing on the film, but I had basically laid it on everyone else. It was like you guys call the prison because you guys need to deal with that, because it's me and I've already laid the framework, but you've got to kind of pitch us in or whatever.
Right.
The day that they finally got around to getting all that sorted out was the day that he was fired upwards. So there was a new warden. No idea who I was, and she wasn't about to grant permission. So we were in like a really big standstill, and here we had already taken money from Investigation Discovery, because I sold the concept of the film before it was actually made. And for people that don't know about filmmaking, a lot of times you raise private funds, especially documentaries. You make the film, and then you take it to things like American Film Market, or you get an agent, or both, and you a packaging agent and purchasing agents and people that shop worldwide rights and domestic rights, and it's this whole kerfuffle of stuff. On top of getting the money to be able to do the project, finishing the project is great. There's a lot of things that are in the can that nobody ever finishes.
Right.
I was littered with those stories, right? So for us to be able to get that money to make the project, it was not a lot of money. It was, always need the thing in the everything. You always can be paid more, always more money to make projects. Could have had more time, could add more this, but whatever, it is what it is. So we had already taken the money, and we weren't allowed in the prison with this big climactic sort of thing that we wanted to do.
Right.
Now, it all rested on my shoulders of like, okay, so I had to go back to Ohio. This is speaking to your question about the footage. So I have a whole hard drive of footage, because I went back with a GoPro and interviewed everyone on my own to get their permission to be in the film, but to also track down a way that I could figure out a way to get into the prison with a camera. So I had to really kind of back channel through a source in the governor's office, a former warden from the prison who was doing a lot with recidivism rates of prisoners and former inmates, and making sure they don't, obviously recidivism, they go back to jail. Well, this is not the case. Works with the thing. She liked my father, all this stuff. So I was able to negotiate this whole thing, and she introduced me to the right people. And I still have this GoPro footage of me giving this pitch to the Ohio Department of Corrections, and it was the best pitch of my life. Hands down. Of like why this film is going to be important. I had maintained a relationship with my father because I wanted to make a project like this, and I wanted his cooperation.
Right.
My father, being a sociopath, it was all about him. He literally kept saying to me, well, when are you and John Morrissey going to make a film to help me get out of prison? I'm like, oh, don't worry, Dad, we're working on it. But I'm got this whole concept in my mind that it's different, right? And anyways, the whole song and dance happens. I get their permission, and we go, and I've got all this on like film with GoPros and stuff, but I think the interesting thing is when we're filming in the prison and things don't go exactly how I pitched them. Now, again, I'm not trying to have a spoiler here, but I ask my father some tough questions. I present some documents to him and things, and discuss. They were livid, and we wrapped filming, and there's like a hot mic moment, and our sound guy was just like kept the cameras rolling, but they were trying to shut the interview down and all this stuff. And I remember like after everything was done, the woman who was the head of the Department of Corrections takes one of the producers into a room, which is probably like a good 30, 40 feet away. This isn't a prison with concrete walls. There was one glass window. And she starts screaming at the top of her lungs at him. What is this? What? And we can hear everything that's being said. And she is just chewing him out over this interview that I have with my father and how I'm a liar, how I said it was going to be this way and it wasn't. They thought it was going to be this big come to Jesus moment. And look, they had their website guy there, a photographer, father and son reunited, this whole thing, moving past the trauma. And it was not that.
Hey,
And not because of me.
I'm just saying you gotta do what you gotta do sometimes, man. That's journalism too, though.
That
And
is.
people don't realize that neither. That with being a photographer, videographer, you're also a journalist. So your responsibility is to get what you came for, no matter what it takes to get it. And if you have to finesse your way to get it, so be it. Yeah, that I like that. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. That's my type of videographer. Like I like that. That's so dope. Yeah. So
Yeah.
after that, what's going on after that now? Like, are you guys in the car? Is somebody crying to the car? Like, because the producer just got chewed out. Like, is he crying on his way to the car? Like, is he
Oh, no. He's just like, he's like this little guy too. His name is Ray. And he was wonderful. But I was just like, oh, poor. I mean, he was the guy that would get it from everyone. Like, all angles from investigation, discovery. This, he was the one that was like having to deal with all the nonsense.
Right.
And
he seems like a great sport. That's what's up, though.
oh yeah, he was fantastic. And but back to so I ended up getting this permission to film there. And I'm calling up. We were denied to be able to film in prison. This big dramatic scene that ends, it's at the end of the film, and which we had pitched to Investigation Discovery. So the day that I get the approval to do this is the day that Trump gets elected, right?
Jesus.
Or the day after, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
So the election. So my fellow filmmakers are, they are just, besides themselves distraught. And I'm not going to get into politics, but I'm not a doom and gloom person. So I'm like, guys, it'll be all right. We'll figure our way out of whatever, this is the hand you're dealt.
Right.
I'm somebody who my entire life have been dealt a heavy hand. You play the cards you're dealt. You just deal, you work the situation out. So I'm trying to get them excited. Like, I got us our permission to film. Remember when they said, we were allowed? They're like, yeah, I know, okay. And I'm like, oh, guys, come on. Like, really? We're going to let this bum us out? Like, here we've saved the film. We're going to get what we hoped for, But yeah, so it was interesting. And the whole experience was just crazy going into the film, going into film in the prison. I think the biggest bummer for me is my father had to sign all this paperwork, and he was so eager to be on camera. So when you watch the film and you see my father come in, again, spoiler alert, but when you see my father come in the room, he's in a really good mood.
Right.
And he literally thinks that I am making a film about him to help him get out of prison. And I never said that to my father, but I never disagreed with that because I wanted his cooperation.
Right, exactly.
I didn't be like, oh, Dad, I'm going to put the hard facts to you, just so you know. No. I'm like, yeah, no, it's cool. It's cool. I'm doing this. Thank you for your help. Like, he was very cooperative.
Right.
I mean, there's ways that you can, because obviously he did his best to be the worst possible human being in my life.
Right.
And my mentality was, okay, that's cool. I get it. Now you're going to do something for me.
Right.
So on the sneak tip, I'm like, I'm not going to give him any heads up or anything. No, this is all about me now.
Right.
And, I had made my peace with it going into the documentary. of my father. I made my peace long before that with my father, forgiving him, and for years. And when I was traveling with the film, and people would ask me, they're like, "Well, how can you forgive him?" I'm like, "You're not understanding. It's not about him. It's about me.
Right. Exactly.
I can't move on." And I just wasn't raised like that. I'm my mother, very much my mother's son.
Right.
And, I heard a great thing on Clubhouse the other day. This guy was talking, and he says, one of the things that helps you get through is when you have a horrible parent, you at least have the satisfaction of knowing that your DNA only comes from 50% of that.
Right. Right.
Your
Right.
DNA is what
That's
comes from that.
crazy. Yeah.
Not
That's a
100%.
dope analogy. Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to use that. So here I
Right.
am
Right.
using
Right.
that
Right. Right.
analogy. So, uh, you know, I say to people, I was like, it's not about him, it's about me. And my DNA from my mother and the way I was raised by her was with compassion and love, and hating and being angry your whole life is not going to do anything. It's not going to bring her back. It's not going to
Right.
make my life any easier.
Right.
And it's one of those things where you can either choose to move on and play the hand you're dealt, or wallow in the abyss of just, oh, life dealt me a shitty hand. Oh, my mother was murdered. Woe is me. That's why, like, when I asked you, you sent me the flyer this morning and it said survivor. I said, no, I'm a thriver. And one of the things I talk about in my podcast, Moving Past Murder, is going from survivor to thriver, because you're not just surviving, you are thriving with the circumstance. You're thriving. You're dealing with your circumstance, right? I have a really good friend, and he didn't grow up. He was raised by his grandparents. His mother was very young when she had him. His real father was incarcerated, and he dealt with, issues and things. And so we all go through it in one way or another. Like my circumstances are so extreme, which I feel is tough. It's a tough cross to bear, but at the same time, it's wonderful in the fact that I am able to relate to so many people, because they'll see the film or they'll watch the TED Talk and they go, I mean, I don't know if I can use profanity, but like they'll say some shit like, "Man, I thought my life was fucked up, bro.
Right.
Like,
Right.
your shit's on a whole other level." And I'm like, yeah, it is. But that doesn't mean that your journey is somehow, lessened by that.
Right.
I
Right.
just
Right.
happen to be the exception, not the rule.
Right.
Like,
Right.
that
Right.
doesn't discount their feelings, emotions, their journey towards their path of healing and dealing with their circumstances.
Right.
But if the gravity of my situation helps them come to grips of what they've been dealing with, that's all I can ask for. That I've
Right.
done my job. And
Right.
it's amazing to be able to have that gift and that power, if you will, that superpower
Yeah.
of resilience to
Yes.
share with people. And that, I think, is probably the greatest gift from making the film and
Right.
from being able to do what I do and have done what I have done and accomplished what I've accomplished, because that to me is, a lot of people, I mean, like, I met you through Clubhouse, right? So a lot of it is very geared, these rooms are very geared towards making money, and that's wonderful, like entrepreneurship and stuff like that. I am always somebody, I mean, let's face it, you don't go into being a filmmaker to make money. There are
Right. Yeah.
much easier ways to make money in life.
Yep.
Like,
Exactly.
be a stockbroker. You want to make
Yep.
money, be Jordan Belfort,
Yep.
but you want to create a legacy, tell stories.
Yep.
That's what I want to do, because long after I'm taking the dirt nap, people are going to be able to look at something and it's timeless. It's about somebody coming to terms with something that happened to them and making the best out of it, and trying to lead by example.
Right. And then what you said too, to piggyback off of what you said though, where we all have had a different extreme of how we lost somebody, but a loss is a loss. You know what I mean? Like, and that's where we all relate, because we lost something, a parent. And I think, and for people who have both parents, they probably won't and it all depends on your relationship as well. Like for me, my relationship with my dad, even though people might be like, you were 3, how you remember that? I'm like, listen, my dad came to see me every day till the day he got murdered. You know what I mean? Like every day I was with this man, even though he didn't live in the household. Believe it or not, you'd be like, well, he lived literally 5 minutes up the block, but he came and made sure he spent at least 4 to 5 hours every day with me. So my relationship and attachment to him was a lot different. So my loss was that much more extreme. Like you had your very tight knit relationship with your mom. You know, for me, I can only sit here and be like, damn, if I had 11 years with my dad, how would that have affected me differently rather than
Yeah.
me at 3 years old? Even though I had an attachment, I can't remember much. So there's not a lot that I can attach to, where you have a lot to attach to as far as memories and the great
Yeah.
times, even in the low times, maybe that in your relationship, it wasn't a low. It was just maybe you were being a rebel and you wasn't listening, like
Oh, the
those,
brat.
yeah, exactly. Like, those are the lows in your relationship with that parent because you were just being a brat, like you said, you know what I mean? So, um, like I said, I definitely appreciate what you bring in that aspect of telling your story. You don't try to make yourself seem a lot more worse off than another person because we all relate in loss, and that's such a big thing, where a lot of people might tell their story, but they always try to make it seem like their loss is a lot bigger than other people, and you put it to an aspect where, no, I relate with all of you, but I'm just telling my side of my loss. This is my side of my story. And I appreciate that. Thank you. I thank you for that. And like I said, for me, when it's time for me to tell my story, I hope that I bring it in that same aspect. But that's why I have the podcast. I have written scripts already. I've already started writing a series, to go down with my life. It's called Dreams. I've only written one episode so far, and it's hard because I'm stuck like, damn, like I don't want to keep writing this because I feel like as I keep writing it, I keep reliving it. And it's kind of like you don't want to relive it, but I know that that's my next process. You gotta live it real quick. Just write it down on the paper and leave it there. You know what I mean? So, is there any advice that you would give somebody who's like who has taken a loss? I'm not going to say like a loss like anybody, but who's taken a loss and they don't know what to do with that pain. Like they don't know where to put it. They don't know how to express it. It's still there, but they don't know what to do with it. Like, do you have any type of anything that worked for you that might work for them?
Yeah. It's again, like in the TED talk, it's you go from why to what now. And I ultimately feel that like when you stop with the whys, you know, and you have a plan of action, and I feel that plan of action is of being of service, right? And for me, my what now started the day after when I woke up and my mother was no longer there. I was in an action plan of finding out what happened and bringing justice for my mother. I was talking to somebody who had a sister very close to her who was murdered in arguably the most famous murder trial in the United States in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing that she said to me was, she's like, I just can't believe your story and that they put you on the witness stand.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to protect her children from having to go on the witness stand against their father and this, that, and the other,
Right.
because I just think it's so devastating. And I said, ma'am, to be honest with you, there was no way I was not going to be on the witness stand.
Right.
I knew what happened. I wanted to tell the story. I wanted justice for my mother. That was my what now. That was how I dealt with it. Like, okay, I'm going to make sure that the man that did this never walks free again. That became my mission. And I think that when you go through these, and this is where I feel that I differ from the vast majority of people, is people can go and say, oh, well, that's easy for you to say, or of course it's easy for you to say, oh, move past it. Well, I've come through a big gap. And one of the things that's also told in the story is when this happened, both sides of my family abandoned me. My mother's side of the family didn't want anything to do with me because of all the shit my father pulled. He had molested their daughters during physicals. He was, I came to find out during making the film, you find out all these backstories that they were trying to a year before my father killed my mother, that the Baltimore Police Department was going to arrest him for molesting these girls. And then the girls in their trauma refused to testify.
Right.
So that was a tough thing to hear, because if that had gone through, he wouldn't have been able to kill my mother.
Right.
So you go through those what if scenarios and
I
things
was gonna
like
say
that.
that was that a scenario you had in your head though, that you thought maybe like the reason he may have did it because the truth was finally gonna come out and she was gonna finally figure out who he really was.
Oh no, she had already talked to her sister about it.
Okay.
She denied it.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't think it had anything to do with that.
Okay.
But when he was arrested, or when they were investigating him, and I had mentioned this to the police officers, or I'm sorry, it had been mentioned by her best friend, who was in my mom's best friend, who was in the film. She had told David Messmore about this. Uh, he spoke to the investigators in Baltimore. They said, "We almost had him. You get that son of a bitch, because we don't doubt that he killed his wife. We have
Yeah.
no trouble believing that. Sad as it is, we have no
That's
trouble with
crazy.
that." So when they did, they were like,
Yeah.
"Got him,"
Yeah. Yeah.
justice.
Right.
And uh, so getting back to what I was saying,
Mm.
I have been through it. So when I talk to somebody and they're like, "So you're asking for advice," I feel that I can speak with an authority position on this because of what I have been through.
Right.
Say, you take it and you devote yourself to being of service. My way of being of service was, okay, I'm going to tell the story to honor my mother's death so it's not in vain, and to be able to change one life.
Right.
That was my goal.
Right.
One life. And I would always have these visions when growing up, even as a kid in Ohio, of like telling the story, making a film, accepting an award, and saying, "I did it for this one kid. If you're out there watching, you are not alone and you will get through this. Just know that. Look at me," And the impact of the film has been tens of thousands of people that have seen it, that have gone, "Whoa, this is heavy. If he's all right, I'm going to be all right."
Right. Right. Right.
And that was my way of being of service, and obviously using my art to be of service and to give a gift to the world, which is a murder in Mansfield,
Right. Right.
and to be vulnerable and all those things that we talked about, because that's so important. So
Right.
my advice to anyone is a long way around here, is that be true to yourself, be authentic, and go for it. And it's a great way to heal. It really is. The catharsis you get from doing something positive,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that is. I'm not saying go make a film. You want to become a kid's little league baseball coach and work with kids because you didn't have that childhood you were robbed from because of X, Y, and Z, and you want to impact people's lives. You want to be a teacher, you want to be a corrections officer, and you want to help, change the world that way. You can do it. I think that if anything has proven that movements are the order of the day, right?
Right. Right.
And if you see things and you want to impact change, go for it.
Yep. And
But
and
you got to do it
so
for the right reasons. You got to do it out of love,
right.
out of service.
Right.
When you approach things that way, that's when you have that success.
That's right. But I'm gonna say that's 100% because I had to learn that for myself personally. I had to learn that because I always thought I want to tell my story, but I just want to tell my story because I feel like my story is something. But when I found out that once again being of service, I've gone as far as being a crisis text hotline operator. Personnel that if somebody's wanting to commit suicide, they want to text somebody. I've opened my phone freely to people that if they want to talk about their situations and stuff like that. So I get exactly what you're saying. Um, I also want to give my audience this clarity, and I think this would probably be the biggest justice to them when I ask you this question: is he ever coming out?
So he was up for parole in, I think it was on October 29th. Yeah. I was going to go back to Ohio in October to talk to the parole board because I So he was up for parole in 2010.
Hmm.
I actually advocated for his release to the parole board. And this sounds a little nefarious, but I knew there was not a chance in hell he was getting out.
Okay.
There were too many people, but I wanted to curry favor with him to maintain that relationship with him.
Hmm.
I wanted to make my film.
Right.
It was
Exactly.
already happening. And yeah, it might be a little sly or whatever, but I knew that if I could be there, and I also genuinely felt that I was at a point, and I wanted to make a point of where I have forgiven him,
Hmm.
and come what may, you know, I'm not saying he needs to be released. I'm not saying that he doesn't need to be released. What I'm saying is that I have, as the principal victim left, as the son of the victim, I feel this way, that I have come through this. And I actually, one of the first things I ever filmed, I had a Panasonic GH1, and I filmed all the stuff going to the parole board, and
Right.
I have all this footage somewhere, which I will eventually do something with. Uh, and I, that was the way that I dealt with that. So flash forward to then, he doesn't get released, which I knew it wasn't. He was up for parole again, and it was my decision. I was going to go back and speak to the parole world, but coronavirus started getting out of control. I
Hmm.
was in the middle of shooting a film. Ohio became like code purple, which means like stay away.
Hmm.
I was like, I can't go. I was just getting ready to start a film. I was like, I can't travel back to Ohio for a few days, do this, come back, and we got to explain to Screen Actors Guild why your DP went to a coronavirus hotbed and then came back and going to be working around your SAG actors and, not really quarantine or whatever, because everybody's paranoid about this stuff.
Right.
So I didn't go. And I just kind of put it on myself like, all right, if he gets released, come what may. I had to kind of make peace. I gave a statement to the prosecutor. A lot of people's reaction, like my personal friends, close personal friends growing up, they said, when they watched the film, they said, if you were ever gonna, F your old man in front of the parole board, you just did it by making that film, because the way that he trips himself up and everything, it's interesting.
Right.
Dr. Phil and I talk about this, and I talk about, like I said, the TED Talk and things, but it's very apparent in the film when people watch it.
Hmm.
But long story short, they did not grant his release. They gave him another 5 years. So he will be eligible again for parole. So what are we, 2021? So like 2025, I believe, when he'll be 82. Now, I hope he's alive and kicking. The one thing I can take away is my old man still has all his hair, and for somebody who has eaten crap food for the last 30 years in prison, he's doing all right.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So like, okay, I don't know about my mom's genetics, but genetically, that's a good.
Right. I was, yeah, when that time comes, if he's ever released, like, is is that gonna bother you, or you have already found your closure to the point where it's like, you know what, he suffered, and he's gonna still gonna have to deal with that in the afterlife when that time comes.
Yeah, I mean, for whatever that's worth, whatever the afterlife is for us, right?
Hmm.
So I, for me, I mean, so one of my favorite top 5 movies as well is The Shawshank Redemption, which is filmed in Mansfield.
Okay.
That prison is in Mansfield, and I did some stuff for my own story there recently. There's a character named Brooks, and Brooks has been incarcerated for like 50 years and gets released and has to deal with the world. And he ultimately ends up hanging himself. And I thought about my father getting released, and I actually was even delving into this in a scripted series about my life, like a television series, which I'm working on. And that's Bible's done, the pitch deck is done, the pilot is done, all this stuff is done, right? Of potentially like what happens if his father gets released and the son has to deal with all of that, right? But I thought, like, okay, like technology, when my father went in was like a cell phone was a briefcase. Now it's a
Right.
computer in your hand that can track everything. You don't even have to have a credit card. You don't even have to have a wallet anymore. You can just buy stuff. The world has just changed so much. Now my father is very good with computers, and he is very technical, which is a cool thing.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's I don't know how he would be able to function in the world outside. You know, David Messmore was very concerned that he would try to come after me and harm me
Right.
for testifying. That he has a vengeful streak in him, and that he, is very, like very vengeful and would want to harm me or my family. And I'm less concerned about myself. And I've had girlfriends I've dated over the years that have been so paranoid about this. And I was like, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do?
That's crazy.
Absolutely nothing I can do.
Right.
You know, uh, and I'm not gonna live in that fear.
Okay. Right.
So, I was more concerned. I was not concerned about myself at all, but I was concerned about like my family, like my adopted parents, and I talked to them about this when he was up for parole, and I was like, I'm concerned. They're like, no, don't worry about us. I was like, yeah, but like if you can't leave the state and you want to hurt me, what's the most convenient? Go after the family that adopted me, even though they're like, well, he doesn't have anything against us. I was like, he is not right in his mind anyways. We already know that.
Right.
That was my main concern with everything.
Okay.
But yeah, he's not up for parole until, like I said, 2025, and we'll deal with that when it comes.
And like I said, I think my audience right now is probably applauding. I'm pretty sure they're happy because that's just like I said. I know that my audience, they're just very like the audience I have. They're just very like they're nosy. I hate to say that, but my audience is nosy. Like they always ask me questions after the podcast. And it's my fault because I do kind of give them the opportunities to ask me questions behind scenes that they may want me to ask, they want me to ask the next person. But I know that's going to be one of those questions after hearing that story is like, but is he ever getting out? Because we've always seen those stories where we thought for one, this person could never get out of jail. And it's either an early release, earlier than expected, or they actually survived to the point where they're like 90 and they're just like, yeah, let them go. They're 90, put them back out there. But not realizing that even at those ages, people are still able to think and still try and still attempt. We think like we kind of undermine a person being like over 80 years old. And I'm like, we've heard of people murdering over 80 years old, because it's timing, it's about timing and that part, so I'm very happy to hear that you're not living in that fear. I'm happy about that because I'm so happy about that because I always hear about this. I always wonder if no, you're living your life, you're doing your thing. From hearing your story on Clubhouse, it immediately I said I gotta get this guy. I gotta hear his story because I want to hear deeper. But for me being a filmmaker, I watched the film before I heard the story. Usually I would talk to you about it before I go watch it. But I was so eager, I was like, no, I gotta watch this. And then you said Hulu. I love Hulu. Don't ask me why. I love Hulu. I don't know why. I don't know why. It's me and Hulu have this connection. Maybe I might have a film up there at some point. I don't know, but I love Hulu. Hulu has got me through some times because I also have Sprint as my phone provider, so we get it for free. So, yeah, so Sprint customers get Hulu for free. So there's a little gym there. So
I'm T-Mobile, so maybe I get it for free too.
Yeah, if you have a Sprint account, all you have to do is I don't remember the website. If you Google it, you can just Google Sprint Hulu, and it'll take you to you just put in your phone number. They'll send you a text, and then you sign up right on your phone, and boom, there you go. So you'll have a free subscription there. Oh, that's a gem I just dropped. I hope Hulu cuts me a check at some point, or maybe even Sprint, which is now T-Mobile. Look at that. I'm just selling stuff. I'm selling stuff here, guys. But no, I really do appreciate, you coming by. I like to call this the house. This is the safe house. I like people to come in and just kick back. You're already kicking back. So you get the drift. You're kicking back, feet up, you're always welcome to come back at any point. If there's any projects you're working on in the future and you want to talk about it, by all means, after we talked about this film, we're going to leave it here. This is where we're going to leave it at. So the next time you come back,
we didn't even delve into the camera gear. We didn't even talk about
And I was just like, you know what? Because it's like, if we go into that, I just know where it's gonna go. We're gonna be here for another 2 to 3 hours. So what I'm gonna do?
I do want to say one thing before you, and you can cut this into.
No, go ahead. No, please go ahead. Say what you guys say.
So being a DP and then being on camera.
Mm-hmm.
So Barbara had 2 DPs because one, her normal DP, Gary Griffin, couldn't come in until the second day of filming. So Tony Hardman was the first guy.
Right.
And he actually ended up being my neighbor in Silver Lake, like literally right down the street. So after
right.
the film, I would run into a Trader Joe's and stuff. So funny. I never met the guy before, right? But I developed the shorthand with those guys because her style is cinema verite, right?
Okay.
Single camera, right in the moment. So I would be like, if I was going to say something like heavy, I knew it was coming, like based upon what they're asking me, because I don't know, I've told my story 5 million times, it must seem like. So I'm very well versed. I would do, like, I had this little thing, I would put my hand next to my lap, like under the table, where I would be like this way, that way, like to signal them, like, okay, I'm about ready to say something that's going to be heavy. It's going to be for a great shot. So get ready to move, to swing that camera around.
That's funny as hell. Because like I said, only filmmakers are gonna know that. Like for real. We definitely talked about you were gonna be in New York, at some point. Yeah. So, I definitely would love to, at some point we can kind of link up in New York. You know what I mean? And maybe we, can talk camera gear at that point as well. Bring out, we'll maybe could do like a little small tutorial for some students on on my YouTube channel, because I do tutorials as well.
I'll have the C70 with me most likely.
I won't have that, but I might have this what is that, Yashica D, and I might bring out my Pentax, and we just talk about film camera. But I definitely would love, just to kind of, just like I said, just meet up with you and just kind of talk about some stuff, and then creators create, man. Like that's where it all comes down to. So anybody on my YouTube channel, looking at this right now, we will have Collier Landry back again, but this time we're going to talk some camera stuff, man, because, we talked about the cameras that you're going to get your hands on. I don't want to tell a secret because I'd rather them just find out for themselves, but you also have worked with a camera already that people are loving. We can say that, the C70. So, before I end it, how do you like that camera?
I love it. I just, like I said, I'm doing a pilot right now for a production company about a show that I'm hosting, actually, which kind of goes in line with my brand, which I'm rebranding for 2021, getting the YouTube channel back up and running, the podcast, Moving Past Murder. The show will be the same name, because my goal has always been, as a creator, I want to be my generation's John Walsh.
Right.
That's always been my thing. So I'm moving in that direction. So I have yet to use the camera. I'm actually going to use it to shoot a reality show probably next week.
Okay.
But I have yet to use it in a professional environment for myself. But the color profile is beautiful. The way that it shoots, the integration of the buttons, the built-in ND filters, the Super 35 frame, 1K, 4K, 120, 10-bit 422 is sensational. None of that 420 DSLR nonsense. Good color, good bit depth. It's not raw,
right,
but you stream it out to a recorder that record in ProRes, like a Blackmagic Video Assist, the new ones that do HDR, all that. It's a beautiful image, and it's a camera that you can grab and go. Small batteries, boom, put the lens on it. You need the RF adapter because it's an RF mount.
Yep.
You put your put your EF lenses on it. It works perfectly. There's even a speed booster that Canon makes to make it a full frame from Super 35, which I might get if it's in stock. But it's a fantastic camera. Grab and go. Smaller than a C300 Mark III, but the same sensor.
Nice. See, look at that. We just sold you guys a lot of stuff. So, like I said, maybe when you're in New York, maybe we can kind of talk about it. Maybe can do like, a quick, like a quick overview of the, everything. You might just talk about it. I think that'd be very dope, at that point.
Oh, I love
it. So can you let everybody know where they can reach out to you at? Like where they can find
you? So all my social media is at Collier Landry. So Instagram, at Collier Landry, Twitter, Facebook. My podcast is called Moving Past Murder. It is, we're just launching the first, by the time you guys are watching this, we've launched the first couple episodes, which is my backstory. There will be interviews with other people who have gone through traumatic circumstances revolving around murder. Eric will probably be on our show as well. And
I would love to go over there and talk. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. It'd be cool. So that's me at Collier Landry. Find me on the interwebs. Website is www.collierlandry.com.
All right.
And you can find me on the TED website, Collier Landry, and watch my TED Talk.
Yeah, I love TED Talks. So anybody that loves TED Talks, please definitely go check that out. What you might have heard here on this podcast, I guarantee you're going to probably hear 10 times more in-depth stuff on that TED Talk. So you guys definitely should go check that out. But you guys already know what it is. You know where you're at. Check me out, Mr. Mriamdigital, or at Digitally Interrupted. You can stream this or you can listen to this on all streaming platforms. Collier, I appreciate you coming by. And like I said, at any point in time, when you're ready to come back, when it's time, when those projects are done, come back to the house, man. Let's talk about it. Let's promote it. Let's inform everybody. All right. So, All right, guys, check you guys out next week. And, next Thursday is, who's actually coming up next Thursday? That's not a surprise. I always love surprises. So we'll definitely talk to you guys later. You guys have a good one and peace.
You are now listening to the #1 podcast.
You have been digitally interrupted.
Mr. I am digital.